Once upon a time there were two little girls named Deb. One little girl grew up to be a preacher while the other grew up to be a pagan, and they both grew up to be the very best of friends. Join the preacher and the pagan as they take a fresh look at Christianity, from the inside out and the outside in.
Welcome to The Preacher and the Pagan. I'm Deb Bodwin. Hey, Deb
And
Sutters.
hi, how you doing? Happy New Year.
Doing fine. So, we're both in a kind of post-holiday fog at this point.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I say let's go for it. We have a topic today, which is
the
why are
gospel.
the Gospels? Why are there only four Gospels?
Exactly. I get asked that a lot,
Mhm.
and a lot of the questioning is based on the discovery. I think it was a Qumran, maybe Masada, where the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Mary and so many other Gospels, James and whatever else, were discovered. And suddenly
Mhm.
we had this wealth of biblical literature or biblical timed literature that scholars could just dig into and find different perspectives. So the question comes back, why the four that we have as canon and not all the rest?
Now, before we start anything else on there, can I ask you, is the validity of these documents in question in any sort of way? Do people really believe that they are contemporary with the other gospels and that sort of thing?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Okay, so that is
absolutely.
not in question.
No, it's not. And often what they had, the modern equivalent would be an anthology, but back in the day they had these books called codexes.
Hmm.
Would have a number of gospels put together in this codex, a bunch of plates or whatever they used, put together between two wooden blocks and leather lace. And a lot of these were found in Egypt. So that leads back to the Coptic tradition, that there was something going on there, that they really, really liked these extra canonical books. And that's what they're called, extra canonical gospels,
Right.
outside of the canon, which is the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Isn't, if I recall correctly, isn't like the oldest established continuous church in existence in Africa?
It would be in that whole triangle of Syria,
Hmm.
Ethiopia, Egypt, somewhere in there, I'm
Yeah,
pretty
'cause
sure.
I
Um,
remember watching a video or something about it, about how they are using traditions that have not been used in hundreds and hundreds of years.
yeah.
And
Well, a lot of the churches in North Africa went underground when the Muslims came in.
got
So
it.
we have a lot of stuff because that part of the world is sand, a lot of stuff has been preserved, which would not have been preserved in a more moisture-based area. So
Exactly.
we get a lot of information from that area. In fact, the Gospel of Mary came out of that area. Um,
Right.
I think the Gospel of Thomas, maybe Gospel of John, infancy narrative. Anyway, there's quite a few of them available. And this is the point where I will tell you the difference between the extra canonical and the canonical. The extra canonical are often just books of sayings, or they are incomplete narratives, or they don't tell a continuous story. Now, the Gospels are not biographies, but they do point to a journey that happens. And the extra canonicals don't have that. And sometimes the canonicals will have really fanciful stories of what Jesus' birth was that are quite different from what we have in Matthew and Luke. And in the early church, it wasn't until about 300, going into the 300s, 400s, that there was what we would call now small o orthodox, like this is the way the church looks.
Hmm.
So when we're talking about the first 3 centuries, we're talking about Christianities, um, which some would recognize that these other gospels had weight, and others would dismiss them completely, or they didn't know about them.
In other words, basically what paganism is today. Got it. Okay.
Right.
Because,
Right.
oh, no, that ain't right. That ain't right.
Yeah.
So now I know what's going to happen here. I know what's going to happen. So at some point in the game, the Catholic Church, who was the church at the time, decided they have to figure out which are the essential gospels, which are the canonical gospels, which are not. Now, here's where conspiracy theory comes into place. What was the politics behind that?
Okay. You want to know the real politics? The Roman Church was not in there. The Roman Church was the backwater church. The power horses were the Syrian Jerusalem area into northern Africa and the Greeks.
Oh, well, that makes a
They
lot of
got into
sense.
squabbles. They went to the Roman Church. So we basically had three areas. When they got into squabbles, they went to the Roman Church to help them settle the squabble. And the Roman Church got a little too big for its britches. And then they developed this whole narrative of the church being established by Peter, which there's absolutely no historical reference to him ever being outside of Galilee except to go to Jerusalem. So that's going on there. So getting back to your conspiracy theory, chances are that it was the Greeks that made these decisions.
Okay. So what lends weight to the Greeks in this horse race?
Well, it's the development of Christianity actually, because it moved from the whole if we look at the three areas argument that I just placed, the from Syria straight right around to Egypt and further west of that on North Africa, that is the place that was more the kind of social change, social gospels, kind of lifestyle Christianity.
Okay.
When the Greeks, so that's Turkey and Macedonia and that all that area
Yeah.
towards the north, they were Athenian. They were philosophers. They had to know. They had to explain everything almost to the point where it's painful. That's where you get the ridiculousness of how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. So all of our hard intellectual stuff comes from the Greek tradition. The liturgies, the worship that we're used to in the Western world, that's where the Romans come in,
Okay.
and the
And
structure we have.
and so the North African stuff is just left in the wayside?
No, no, and that's what I mean by there's still so much going on. So historically, they were already having issues with the Greeks when it came to the nature of Jesus. The Greeks were homoousia, so Jesus was fully God and fully human. The Coptics, though, and the rest in that area did not share that belief. They believed that Jesus was divine and that he was a likeness of God, or God and likeness of human. Both of those theories existed at that time. So there was this intellectual argument going on, and so the Coptics already had pulled away around the year 500. Remember, I've told you before that the church goes through a major upheaval every 500
Yep.
years.
Mm-hmm.
First 500, the Coptics left, and that was right around the time when Western Rome had their problems. So they already left with a different theory, a different understanding of who Jesus is in relation to everybody else,
And the
which is
Coptics
probably
kept
why.
on in their own area and just split off from the church, or were they consumed?
Well, see, around 500 they split off.
Okay.
But the Muslims came in around 700, so they they were essentially a religiously conquered people by those who now believed this new tradition of Islam,
Got it.
who came into these communities and allowed them to exist, sort of, kinda, but not grow. So
Okay.
that also influenced how that worked, and it's in that period of time when a lot of these old gospels were hidden away. so that they could not be destroyed. So, and that's the wealth that we now have in the 20th
Okay.
and 21st centuries.
There you go. Thank you. That
You're
was
welcome.
okay. So while the Coptics are hiding, stashing the goods,
Mhm.
on the other hand, we've got the Greeks going on, and they
Right.
still have how many gospels?
They're working on the four gospels.
Okay, so they haven't really locked those gospels in yet.
They might not have had access to them. That's the other thing. When we, as I said when we opened up, the Gospel of Mary was found in Egypt, but there's no other references to it in any other place that we've discovered. Not the Vatican libraries, not in some of the other places that have been excavated. So they just might not have been shared as widely,
Mhm.
or it might not have been regarded as highly, because using the Gospel of Mary and Gospel of Thomas, for examples, they're the two most popular after the four canonical Gospels. They they're about teachings, not about Jesus' ministry. So Thomas is known for having sayings, and a lot of them are parallel to what goes on in the Synoptic Gospels, so Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but not exact. And then Mary, we have huge chunks missing. So we don't know uh, what might have been in there. And it's actually a conversation where Mary and Paul and Peter get into it, and they're not friends.
Yeah, I've read it.
Yeah, yeah. But it's a really good perspective, especially me as a historian. It's a fantastic perspective on what some of the thought processes were and practices of the early church. So they have validity even today for studying what other thoughts and theories were going on for those first 3 centuries.
Okay, cool.
And the other problem is we don't have any originals. These are copies of copies of copies,
Well, yeah.
all of them.
So it's
So
basically a philosophical and religious telephone game.
yeah, essentially. Yeah. Yeah. And multiple versions of these gospels because they've been copied. It was all hand done. So there was mistakes or omissions or word changes or entire sections inserted or removed. So that's what biblical scholars, that's their playground.
God bless. So trying to suss out what was the original, or not even what was the original of what was added in, what was taken out, what was mistakes, what was not mistakes. I can't even
Their
imagine
careers
doing
on
that
that.
job. Yeah, that
Yeah,
would be
that's
mind-boggling.
those are career jobs. Now, there are people in the world today who will spend their entire career on 5 verses of one book.
Yeah. Okay. I don't think I could do that.
Nope. No, but thank God they do them because that gives us information for those of us who are in other fields.
Talk about hyper focus, huh?
Yep.
I mean, seriously, that's amazing to me.
Mhm.
So let's talk about four. Why four? Not why not three? Why not five? Why not 10?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Um, and the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are very different from John. There's a lot of theories floated around that they came from different communities around the Middle East. I think Matthew is believed to be a church in Syria, modern Syria. Luke is a very high order, high level Greek gospels. So he might have been done over in the Greek area or the Decathlon, like the Greek area is close. So looking at the geography of where some of the stuff might have been written could lend credence to why there's only four. It might have been a geographic thing that there's four that were known. It could be the influence of certain bishops when these things were decided. And bishops were not the administrators that we have today. They were the teaching elders of the day. They were the ones that got together. Like St. Nicholas was a bishop. So he would have been part of a lot of these decisions in the early 300s because that's when he was a bishop. And uh, others would have decided that what was worthy and what was not, what showed our theology and what kind of distracted from our theology. And it's at this point in time, we're talking again, the small o Orthodox theology, and that path that the Greeks kind of pushed forth for us.
Okay. And what,
There's no way of knowing if they looked at these things and had like 8 out, and it's like, no, we like these 4. We don't have enough information to either include that or disclude that as part of the process.
so then comes the question, and I don't know if there is an answer for that. Do we know what criteria they used for judging these gospels as
Oh,
valid?
we don't know, but we can hypothesize. There's a word there. I can
Yeah,
forget
that
about
word.
hypothesize. That's it. Basically, reading back into it, we can see that they're looking for narratives, not biographies, but narratives. They're looking for faith development stories. They're looking for anything that points to Jesus as Messiah. Nothing is questioning that. And these are all, this is all read back into. So looking at what must have been their criteria based on the similarities and differences in the 4 gospels that we do have. But there's nothing historic that we can go back and say, oh yeah, this is what they were talking about back then.
Wouldn't you have liked to be a fly on that wall?
Oh my heavens, would I ever? I flies on many, many walls for the first three or 500 years of the Christian church.
They're probably all sitting there going, Irving, I told you once, I told you twice, do not bring your lunch to work. We will eat when we eat. You cannot snack between discussions.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Because, these were still people.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what's so fun when I'm just my St. Nicholas reference. Kids really, their eyes pop when I tell them that St. Nicholas was a Christian. Like and he was a real historic person. And I really walk that one lightly, of course, because a lot of kids are actually encouraged to believe in Santa Claus. But they just like, it blows their mind that Santa Claus would have been there. And the Christmas Chronicles, I don't know if you've seen them on Netflix. Christmas Chronicles 2 actually has a reference to St. Nicholas coming from Turkey in the 300s. So kudos to them for actually getting that history right.
I'm going to have to rewatch it. I saw the first one and I think I saw the second one, but it was a while back.
It makes my historian heart happy. Um,
I
but
think they do
they,
those things just for people like us. There's like
oh
little
yeah,
1% nerd things going on.
really, yeah, and I totally respect that. But when we're talking about bishops in that time, we're talking about people that were identified as being really learned or intelligent or inventive in the terms of teaching what the faith is all about. They were kind of plopped into the role of bishop, and this is before it became a title.
Okay.
But they were plopped into that role at a time, remember, when this is still all of the scriptures are still totally in flux. So some of them are functioning with the assumption that first of all, an example is the letters of Clements. Some of them treat those as scripture, some of them just treat them as letter, and it's a curiosity. So there was no really solid way of figuring this stuff out. What is scripture and what is not? So when the early church, the Greeks, got together to have these discussions, they wanted to essentially put brackets around the narrative, not control it necessarily, but just kind of put parameters around it. So this is what we are, this is what we are not. And it's in those discussions that the various books in the New Testament are identified.
Okay. And so now going back to contemporaneous times, I like to try to find out what's going on the other end of the spectrum. We've got these bishops having these high level philosophical and theological discussions.
Mm.
How is this affecting just the everyday Christian? I mean, are they aware that these conversations are happening amongst the top brass? Are they involved in any way? Do they have opinions or anything like that? Or is there pushback when certain things are included or not included?
There is not enough evidence to answer any of those questions, but my assumption would be that they would not be part of much of it. They would be doing their thing. I was talking with someone recently, and I said, as far as I know, because I'm not familiar with the Eastern religions, but as far as I know, Christianity is the only religion that morphs to the culture where it's practiced. So, like the Mexican Christian church, that's
Mm,
identifiable, and the German Christian church is identifiable, and the Chinese Christian church is identifiable.
right.
They're all Christian, but they all have different ways of doing things. I suspect that was what was going on in the early church, that people were just doing what they do. Um,
Adapting it to themselves instead of adapting themselves to it.
Precisely, yes. Because first and foremost, the Christian tradition is a lifestyle. It is a social justice, social gospel, fix the world, make it good for everybody lifestyle. The Greeks got a hold of it and made it into a philosophy, but that is not what people on the ground are necessarily living.
I want to just unpack that a little bit more. The difference between a lifestyle and a philosophy, wouldn't one influence the other?
Absolutely. But this is where the whole teaching elder, the bishop came in. The bishop was basically the conduit between what would have been larger conversations, which did not happen a lot, but there were councils, and the local conversations. And part of what happens once the church becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire is that those who have structure basically overtake those who do not. And that's
Mm.
when you start to see the conformity. But up until the mid 300s, there's it's like the wild, wild west as far as what they believe and what they do. I mean, they've got the central practices like baptism is there, Eucharist is there, Easter is there. But they're not celebrating Christmas. They're not celebrating with the same liturgies. They're just kind of doing what works for them in their local communities.
I saw a meme the other day, and I'm sure I forwarded it to you. It says, the Roman church did not become Christian, the Christian church became Roman, and that makes
Yes, I
all the
thought that was
difference.
brilliant.
I was
That was
like, oh,
brilliant.
somebody thought that up.
Yeah, yeah, no, very well thought out.
Yeah. But I mean, that's so we have these four gospels. Is there any potential for these discovered documents to become canon?
No.
Okay.
And
And
the
why
reason
is
I
that?
say no is because we have an international body called the World Council of Churches. They have looked at all the books in the New Testament, and they have talked at various times through history whether we're going to open the gospel and get rid of stuff or include stuff. One of the big ones was 1500. Martin Luther wanted to get rid of the Book of Revelation. He said people were misreading it. It was just causing problems. Get it out
Mm.
of there. It's going to be hell on wheels as we go forward. He was prophetic. He was absolutely right. But the church was not prepared to do that level of editing because then every generation gets in there and tinkers. And the gospel, the canon, is seen as a traditional set of books that is come down through us to us through history. No one really, really wants to get in there and tinker too much.
Fair enough.
But that does
Although,
not mean that some of these are not being read or shared in Bible study or worship anyway.
well, then you can't really stop people from doing that once
Oh,
the cat's
but
out of the bag.
it's not gonna show up in the latest Bible Society and translation of the Bible. But
No.
people who are like I've shared Thomas and Mary with various Bible study groups I've done because it's a really good balance to what is in the Bible, and it gives a fuller sense of where people were thinking at the time, what was going on for them.
Oh, I think we know a word for that. What is that word again? Oh, I don't know. Maybe context?
Yeah, I like that one.
Context. We love it.
Yep,
It's a good thing.
it is very much a good thing.
But
Yeah.
I find it so interesting hearing about the nature of the early church and how much it's like what pagans experience right now, because yeah, it is adaptable, it is in flux, and I don't think that's always such a bad thing. I wonder how much of the problems that Christianity faces comes from this calcification of um dom doctrine.
Yeah. And then that conversation does happen routinely. Every generation or every other generation actually has that conversation. And I know those conversations are going on right now, that have we limited our understanding of what the early church was and could be, and how it can be brought back to life in a world where we're very much like the first centuries. Are we missing something by only adhering to um, I think it's 22 books in the New Testament? Um, what what are we missing? What should we add? What should we subtract? Where do they come from? How valid are they? We've got a whole group of letters that are identified as having been written by Paul, and scholars have now decided that no, they weren't. They were just assigned to Paul. So were they part of the teachings at the time? Were they his disciples? How do we weigh these compared to the basic letters of Paul, which were the earliest Christian writings we have? How do they relate to the Gospels? And I was in I was preaching a couple months ago, and we had the Gospel reading, and then we had one from, I don't know, Thessalonians, Philippians, one of those. And she asked me why they weren't matching up. And the question took me by surprise. So when I came back to her a couple of weeks later and I said, okay, here's the thing. And it's that when these books were being written, there was nothing, uh, there was no through line. A lot of the beliefs that we now identify as Christianity weren't even imagined at that point in time.
In other words, we didn't have the World Wide Web or the internet or anything like that to
Yeah.
communicate. So some things I don't, it just, I could not deal with being a biblical scholar. My brain just sort of breaks into
It's
pieces.
a kind of cool field, actually. And part of the other problem is that resources were so limited that a lot of what is preserved might be just by chance, and we might have 80% of what was going on totally lost to time now, and all we can do is imagine what that would have looked like. Um, uh, there's just rich people were the ones that did a lot of the writing because they had the resources and the time. What's going on in a church that sees itself primarily as social justice workers? They didn't spend the time writing things down. So how much of that is lost to us?
Man, you want to really, really rip open the fabric of society, invent a freaking time machine.
Yeah, I
You
know.
will destroy civilization as known, because everything we know will be completely blown up and the entire structure of society will be in free
Absolutely.
fall. And
We've got a few biases when we're looking back in history. The first bias is that unless otherwise identified, it was written by a man. That's a bias. The second one is that people then lived as we do today. So
Mhm.
that's a bias that we have to check. The third bias is that people were more simplistic in the past. And that's a really hard one to get your head around, that they were just as complicated, just as convoluted, just as curious about the world as we are today. And we've
Mhm.
lost so much of that. I mean, I'm still at the camp that mourns the loss of the Library of Alexandria.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Mhm.
what is there that we could have had? What are we missing? And there could be more gospels out there that might have been in the running, and there might be literature out there about that, but there's nothing that I have come across that speaks directly to that. And I'm not going to pretend that I've read everything, but certainly can't even come close. But what I have read, I don't I don't know necessarily what their criteria was going in or what other options they were looking at.
That is an entire podcast on its own. This idea that so much of our history has been destroyed and is currently being destroyed. I mean,
Yeah,
the
precisely. And that's why when people say this is the way it used to be, it's like,
oh,
no, can't do that.
I mean, how many archaeological sites the archaeologists are rushing through everything because the people who own the land want to build a parking lot, and
Yep,
they're only forced to give you so much time to do what you need to do, and then they're going to bulldoze it.
that's right. Yep.
And then that's not even getting into the political stuff where, you conquer a land and you go in and you start destroying all the statuary
Yes.
and the temples and the religious
Yep.
relics and all that stuff. Oh, it makes my
Yeah.
head hurt.
That's why history and archaeology are never going to be finished.
No.
We've always
And
got more.
it's really hard for people who are not history or archaeology nerds or that sort of thing to really grasp that you have to just be comfortable with the idea that you cannot know for sure.
Yeah, the ambiguity is a big part of it. And if you're going to contribute even a minuscule amount to the conversation, that's as much as it's going to be.
Yeah. And so, by hook or by crook, Christianity has gone from tons to four, count them, four gospels. And, that's cool. That's better than most people have. I don't have a gospel. You don't have a gospel. So, I mean, at least the Christian church has got four they can share,
Yep.
you know.
And the other nugget about that, they're all anonymous. They've been assigned the names Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but they were not the writers.
Have you ever heard that quote? I think 90% of the time in history, anonymous was a woman.
Yes, yes, I have. And actually, there's some validity to that in the Gospel of John. They think that actually might have come out of the school of Mary. There was when Origen, that's who it was, when he was writing. So this would be 200s, maybe. I'd have to go back and look up his dates. He referenced a strong Christian movement led by Miriam, which we think is a reference to Mary Magdalene, and it's out of her disciples, her followers, that the Gospel of John might have come as well as the Gospel of Mary.
Very cool.
All open for speculation because like none of this we can put hard and fast, but that's using the language, using the references that both have to the beloved disciples. It's a good chance that John for sure was written by, if not women, people who were influenced by women.
And that is a podcast for another time, right? I think
Yes,
we're
it
running
is.
out of time here, but this was actually extremely fascinating to me. I mean, the concept of Christianity being as flux and fluid as paganism right now to me is it's encouraging and it's also kind of scary. I don't want the Romans ever to get a hold of my version of paganism because I don't want to see it in 1,000 years.
Well, the new Romans are the Americans, so
Oh,
I
God
think that's
save
already
us.
happening.
I'm sorry. We're okay. We're getting better. We're getting better. We're
And you've
working
got
on
Wikipedia, so and the World
it.
Wide Web.
Yes, and that is something that is absolutely unprecedented. And time machine coming back in 500 years and see what kind of cultural influence the internet has had on humanity. Yeah, that's another thing to destroy us with our time machine. Yay. So, but I think it's probably time to go ahead and wrap it up.
It is. Yeah.
Uh,
This has been fun, Deb.
this was fun, Deb. We need to get back into this. I'm sorry we missed our December, but we were both kind of crazy.
Yep.
And let's go ahead and wrap it up. I am Deb Bodwin.
And I'm Deb Suttard.
And we are the Preacher and the Pagan, and you are our listeners. Thank you so much. Come back next month. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Preacher and the Pagan with Deborah Suttard and Deborah Bodwin. This podcast is a two-lady podcast production in conjunction with the Barefoot Evangelist. Our producer and sound editor is Catherine Gordon. Our theme music was composed by Deborah Bodwin. You can reach us at thepreacherandthepagan@gmail.com or by visiting our website at barefootevangelist.ca/podcast.